"It's a special blend, just for you," my daughter-in-law whispered, sliding a mug of lethal poison across the mahogany table. My son Daniel just stood there, pale and sweating, waiting for his inheritance to kick in. They looked at my trembling hands and saw a senile old relic ready to be discarded. They forgot that I didn't build a global logistics empire by letting the cargo get delivered to the wrong address. They thought the digoxin would stop my heart within the hour, but when the police kicked down the doors at noon, I wasn't the one gasping for air on the Persian rug. If you're listening to this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps to know there are still people who value loyalty in this world. Let me back up and tell you how a cup of Christmas coffee became a weapon of war. The snow had been falling over the Hudson Valley for 48 hours, a relentless, suffocating curtain of white. It didn't drift. It accumulated, heavy and wet, sealing the long, winding driveway and burying the century-old stone walls that marked the perimeter of my property. To the outside world, my estate probably looked like a postcard of Christmas perfection. A manor of dark stone standing defiant against the storm, the 12-foot fir tree glowing warmly in the great window, the smoke curling lazily from the chimney. But I have never been a stranger to my own home. I know its groans in the wind. I know which floorboards betray a footstep. And tonight, the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a vault of white silence. My name is William Sterling. For 40 years, I sat at the helm of a global logistics empire. My business was not merely moving cargo from point A to point B. It was the science of anticipation. I built my fortune on the ability to predict disaster before it arrived. I learned to spot the hairline fracture in a bridge span long before the first truck drove over it. I learned that systems do not collapse without warning. They give signs, they groan, they vibrate. The most dangerous threats never scream. They whisper, and for the last 3 days, the whispers in my own home had become deafening. I sat in my wingback leather chair in the library, the spine of the book in my lap, unbroken for an hour. A heavy wool blanket, a tartan pattern my late wife, Margaret, had favored, covered my legs. I was 72 years old. Last winter, a mild stroke, a cerebral event, the doctors called it with clinical detachment, had left me with a slight persistent tremor in my left hand and a cane that I required to navigate the halls. To the world, and certainly to my guests, I was a retired lion, old, slow, toothless, a relic gathering dust in a big, empty house. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. My body may have betrayed me, but my mind remained as sharp as a diamond cutter, grinding away at the data, analyzing the load-bearing capacity of the relationships around me. I stared at the fire. The flames licked the oak logs, hungry and bright, casting long, dancing shadows against the bookshelves. But I wasn't watching the fire. I was listening to the house. It was too quiet. The silence was heavy, pregnant with intent. Then I heard it. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the heavy oak doors, pacing, heavy, uneven strides, back and forth, back and forth. That was Daniel, my son. Then came a different sound. The sharp, rhythmic click-clack of high heels on the hardwood. Precise. Aggressive. That was Amanda. They had arrived on Christmas Eve, 3 days ago. Daniel was my only child, a man of 40 who still carried the uncertainty of a teenager in his eyes. He was an architect, a dreamer who hens buildings that were beautiful but impractical. I loved him fiercely, with the painful, terrifying love of a father who knows his child is not built for the cruelty of the world. He had a soft heart, a fatal structural flaw in our line of work. He had a spine that bent too easily to the will of others, especially when Amanda pushed. He never learned to say no, not to me, not to the world, and certainly not to her. Amanda was different. She was a creature of sharp angles and polished surfaces, a former high-end real estate broker who viewed every human interaction as a negotiation. She saw the world as a balance sheet of profit and loss. She was beautiful, intelligent, and currently, she smelled of desperation. I shifted in my chair. The leather creaked, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. I froze, waiting to see if they had heard. They hadn't. Through the sliver of space between the heavy oak doors, which I had left intentionally ajar, I saw them. Daniel ran a hand through his thinning hair. His face was pale, glistening a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the house. He looked like a man standing on a gallows. Amanda gripped his forearm, her fingers digging into the fabric of his gray cashmere sweater. "He's not going to agree, Amanda," Daniel hissed. His voice was low, shaking, cracking under the strain. "You don't know him like I do. He'll look at the numbers. It's $500,000, for God's sake," Amanda whispered back, her voice a sharp blade wrapped in velvet. "We are drowning, Daniel. The foreclosure notices on the condo complex, the leverage we took on the sprawling properties in the city. If he sees the books, he sees everything." "He'll see the gambling debts," Daniel choked out. My eyes narrowed. The fire in the hearth seemed to dim. Gambling debts. I had known about the bad real estate deals. I had tracked the failing market, and knew Daniel's firm was overextended. But this was new data, a variable I hadn't accounted for. Another secret, piling up like the snow against the glass. "Keep your voice down," Amanda snapped, her whisper dropping to a terrifying hiss. Her eyes darted toward the library door, scanning for movement. She looked like a viper coiled to strike, lethal, efficient, cold. "We don't need him to agree, Daniel," she said. She stepped closer to him, invading his space, her hand sliding up his arm to cup his neck. It looked like a caress, but I saw the tension in her tendons. It was a hold. "We just need him to sign the release for the trust. We need the power of attorney." "But he's lucid, Amanda. He's fine," Daniel pleaded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and guilt. "He reads every contract twice. He spots errors in the margins. He's not senile." Amanda stared at him, her eyes devoid of warmth. "He's old, Daniel," she said coldly. "Hearts give out. The cold weather strains the system. Accidents happen." She paused, letting the silence hang between them like a guillotine blade, especially with his medication. A man his age, the dosage is a delicate thing. My blood ran cold, colder than the wind howling against the leaded glass windows. I sat perfectly still. I didn't gasp. I didn't flinch. I simply closed my eyes and let the machinery of my mind process the data. Threat detected. Source internal. Level critical. They weren't here for Christmas. They weren't here for family or for reconciliation, or even for a loan. They were here for a funeral. My funeral? I had suspected financial trouble. My private investigator, Frank Miller, my former head of security and now the chief of police in our district, had sent me a dossier a week ago. The file detailed foreclosure notices, lawsuits, and liens. It listed Amanda's debts to some very unsavory lenders in the city, men who didn't use lawyers to collect. I had planned to offer them a bailout today. I had the checkbook in my desk drawer. I was ready to write the numbers that would save them, to offer them a second chance, to rebuild the foundation of my son's life. I was ready to save them, but this was not a request for help. This was a hostile takeover. They didn't want my money. They wanted my life. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hand trembled slightly. The stroke had taken my steadiness, but it had not taken my resolve. I opened a text message to Frank. I typed 3 sentences, code red. "Come to the gate. Wait for my signal." I hit send. The trap was set. Now I just had to survive long enough to spring it. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Silence returned, but now it was charged with electricity. I slipped the phone under my leg, hidden beneath the wool blanket. I picked up my book, feigning interest in a paragraph I had already memorized. I forced my breathing to slow. Inhale, exhale, regulate the heart rate. I forced my face into a mask of benign senility. The slack jaw, the distant gaze, the harmless old man they needed me to be. The brass door handle turned slowly. "Merry Christmas, William." Amanda's voice floated into the room. It was sweet, too sweet, like molasses covering rot. I looked up, my expression blank. She was wearing a festive red apron over her expensive cashmere sweater, holding a silver tray with steady hands. "Merry Christmas, Amanda," I said. My voice was raspy, deliberately weak. I sounded like a tired old man at the end of his road. "Where is Daniel?" "Oh, he's just taking a work call," she lied smoothly, stepping into the room. "I wanted to bring you your morning coffee. I know how much you love your dark roast." She walked toward me, her steps measured. On the tray sat 2 large ceramic mugs. One was red, painted with a jovial Santa face. The other was green, adorned with a reindeer. Steam curled from them in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of rich coffee and something else, something faint. "I made it special," she said, setting the tray on the low table beside me. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her his. It stopped at her mouth. A practiced muscular contraction. "I added a secret ingredient, my grandmother's recipe. It's supposed to be very soothing for the heart." The heart. She was playing with fire. She was mocking me to my face, banking on my ignorance. "A secret ingredient?" I asked, raising a snowy eyebrow just a fraction. "How intriguing." She glanced at the window behind me, squinting against the glare of the snow. "I'll just go close the drapes," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "The sun is so bright on the snow, it must be hurting your eyes." She turned her back on me to walk toward the window. It was a tactical error. A profound miscalculation. She turned her back on the target. Amateur mistake. Never take your eyes off the enemy, not even for a second. I didn't hesitate. The frailty vanished from my limbs. I reached out with my good right hand. I didn't slide the cups. Sliding creates friction, and friction creates sound. I lifted the red mug, the one she had placed directly in front of me, and then I lifted the green mug. I crossed my arms in the air, a silent, deadly dance. I set them down in opposite positions, red to her side, green to mine. The switch took 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. When she turned back, the heavy drapes drawn against the winter light. I was adjusting my blanket, my hand handed slightly on the fabric. "There," she said, smiling. That shark-like smile. Much better. She walked back to the table and sat in the chair opposite me. "Now," she said, "drink up while it's hot." She sat in a high-backed velvet chair opposite me, crossing her legs with the practiced elegance of a woman who knows she is being watched, yet completely unaware of how she was being watched. She reached out and picked up the red mug, the mug she had prepared for me, the mug that was now sitting on her coaster. "Cheers, William," she said, lifting the ceramic to her lips. Her eyes locked onto mine, searching for a tremor, a sign of weakness, a flicker of suspicion. I held her gaze. I did not blink. I reached for the green mug, my hand moving with a deliberate, agonizing slowness that I knew would be interpreted as geriatric decline. "To family," I replied. My voice was steady, but inside I felt a chasm opening up. It was a toast to a quarter, toast to the death of the lineage I had spent 40 years building. I lifted the green mug. I watched her. I watched the muscles in her throat work as she swallowed. She took a large, confident gulp, likely to mask the tremors of her own adrenaline. She lowered the cup, a tiny smear of foam on her upper lip, which she wiped away with a manicured thumb. She said, forcing a brightness into her tone that jarred against the somber atmosphere of the library. "Delicious, don't you think?" "Yes," I agreed. I brought the green mug to my lips. The steam hit my face, hot, humid, smelling of roasted beans and cinnamon. I took a sip. It is good coffee. Rich, dark, safe. "I can taste the secret ingredient," I said, lowering the mug. "Nutmeg, something like that," she said, her eyes gleaming with a terrible, hungry anticipation. She was waiting for the show. She was waiting for the grand finale, the clutch at the chest, the gasp for air, the confusion. She was waiting for me to die so her life could begin. "Enjoy it, Amanda," I thought, the bitterness of the thought overpowering the coffee. "It is the last thing you will ever taste." I took another sip, larger this time, letting her see me drink it down. "It is invigorating," I lied. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the crackle of the fire, and the wind buffeting the stone walls outside. She watched me like a hawk, her body tense, leaning forward slightly. Every time I blinked, I saw hope flare in her eyes. Hope that I wouldn't open them again. I checked my watch, 11:42 a.m. Digoxin is not a bullet, it is a siege engine. It takes time to breach the walls. When administered in a lethal dose, which I assumed this was, given her desperation, the absorption is a budded, the systemic failure is a slow, cascading collapse. First, the gastrointestinal distress. Then, the visual disturbances, the yellow halos around lights, the blurring of edges. Then the arrhythmias. The clock was ticking. Suddenly, the heavy oak door creaked. It was Daniel. If Amanda looked like a predator, Daniel looked like prey that had already been mauled. He stood in the doorway, his hand gripping the brass knob, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He was pale, a sickly gray undertone to his skin that matched his sweater. He was wiping his free hand on his trousers, over and over, a nervous tick I hadn't seen since he was a boy waiting for his report card. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked, dry and brittle. He stepped into the room but wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. "Merry Christmas." I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike on this very driveway, the boy I had carried to bed when he fell asleep watching movies, the man who was now standing by while his wife murdered me. "Merry Christmas, son," I said. My voice was warm, a sharp contrast to the ice in my veins. "Come in. Sit down." Amanda was just treating me to her special coffee. Daniel froze mid-step. His head snapped up. He looked at the mug in my hand, still half full. Then his eyes darted to Amanda. He saw the red mug on her coaster. It was empty. His eyes widened, a flicker of confusion. Then horror passed over his face. "Did you—" Daniel started, his voice barely a whisper. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. "Did you drink it?" He was asking me, but he was looking at her. "Every drop," I lied, setting my mug down with a dull thud. It was exactly what I needed. Daniel slumped onto the leather sofa adjacent to us. He didn't sit. He collapsed as if his strings had been cut. He looked sick. He put his head in his hands, his fingers digging into his scalp. He knew she was going to kill me. He knew exactly what was in that cup, and he had let it happen. He had stood in the hall, pacing, terrified, but compliant. My heart didn't break. It calcified. The grief was there, massive and crushing, but I pushed it down into the containment vaults of my mind. There would be time to mourn the son I thought I had later. Right now, I had to survive the son I actually had. "So," I said, leaning back in my wingback chair, affecting the posture of a patriarch surveying his domain. "Before we open presents, I wanted to talk to you both about the future." Amanda perked up. This was F's. The moment she had been scripting in her head for weeks. She thought the medicine was kicking in. She thought I was becoming pliable, confused, ready to sign away the empire before the end came. "Of course, William," she said, smoothing her apron. "What's on your mind?" "I know things have been tight," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the top of Daniel's bowed head. "I know the markets have been unkind. I know about the condo market crashing in the city. I know about the loans." Amanda stiffened. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flash of defensive anger. "I don't know what you mean," she said quickly. "We're doing fine. The market is just correcting." "I am giving you a chance," I said. My voice dropped an octave. It was no longer the voice of a grandfather. It was the voice of the CEO, the voice that had negotiated trade deals with nations and crushed competitors who thought they were smarter than me. "Right now," I said, enunciating every word, "tell me the truth. Tell me you are in trouble. Tell me you need help." I was offering them a lifeboat. Even now, even after the poison. If they confessed, if they showed a shred of humanity, of remorse, perhaps there was a path back. Not to trust, but to survival. Daniel raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, wet with unshed tears. I saw the boy I raised fighting to get out, fighting the suffocating grip of his wife's ambition. Daniel started, his voice trembling. "Dad, we are doing great," Amanda interrupted, her voice shrill, cutting him off like a whip crack. She glared at Daniel, a silent, savage command. "Shut up. Stick to the script." "Really, William," she continued, turning back to me with a smile that was now strained and tight. "We are just expanding the business. That's all. Growing pains." She was doubling down. She was betting everything on the poison. I looked at Daniel. "Daniel?" I asked softly. "Is that true?" He looked at his wife. He looked at her eyes, hard and warning, promising retribution, if he folded. He looked at me, his father, who was offering him a way out, He looked down at his hands. Yes, Daniel whispered. It's true, we're fine. Strike two, son. You chose the lie. You chose the poison. Very well, I said. I reached into the inner pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a slim rectangular piece of paper. A check. Then I suppose you won't need this. I held it up. It was a cashier's check, drawn on my private account. The amount was clearly visible, $500,000. Amanda's eyes locked onto the paper. Her pupils dilated. For a second, the greed overrode everything. The caution, the plan, even the poison coursing through her blood. Check, she asked, her voice breathless. I wrote this morning, I said casually, flicking the paper with my thumb. I was going to pay off your debts. Clear the slate. Give you a fresh start for the new year. I watched Amanda's face. It was a mask of panic warring with avarice. She realized what she had done. She had accelerated a murder for money that was being handed to her freely. But, I said, if the debts don't exist, if you are doing fine, I made a show of preparing to tear the check in half. No, Daniel blurted out, half rising from the sofa. William, wait, Amanda said, her hand reaching out involuntarily. And then it started. She blinked, once, twice, rapidly. She raised a hand to her temple, rubbing the skin as if trying to erase a smudge. Is it, she started, her voice wavering, is it hot in here? I watched her closely. Her face was flushing. The perspiration on her forehead was no longer just a sheen. It was beading. It's quite comfortable, I said, my voice cool and detached. Perhaps 70 degrees. I feel dizzy, she muttered. She shook her head, but the motion seemed to make it worse. She grabbed the arms of the chair to steady herself. The lights? They're so bright. She squinted at the Christmas tree in the corner. Why are the lights yellow? She whispered. Santa power. Yellow vision. The digitalis was binding to the sodium-potassium pumps in her retinas. The toxicity was advancing faster than I had calculated. Her body mass was lower than mine. The dose was more concentrated. I checked my watch again. 12:02 p.m. Are you all right, Amanda? I asked. You look pale. I'm fine, she snapped. Though the words lacked her usual venom, they were slurred. Just a headache. The coffee. It was strong. Yes, I said. Very strong. Just then, a sharp, tentative knock echoed from the kitchen door. It wasn't the heavy oak front door. It was the service entrance, the one that led through the mudroom. Who could that be? Amanda asked, annoyed. She tried to focus on the door, but her eyes were having trouble tracking. Probably Elena, I said. She likes to check on me when the weather is bad. Elena was my housekeeper. She had been with me for 20 years. She was small, quiet, and possessed an intellect that people constantly underestimated because of her accent and her uniform. She noticed everything. Which dust bunny had moved? Which bottle was out of place? The door pushed open. Elena walked in, wiping snow from her heavy wool coat. She didn't look at me immediately. She looked at Amanda. Her dark eyes were sharp, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Mr. Sterling, Elena said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension in it. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I found something. She stepped further into the room, ignoring the mud she was tracking onto the Persian rug. In her hand, held up like evidence in a courtroom, was a small, empty glass vial. It was amber-colored, with no label. I found this in the guest bathroom bin, Elena said innocently, though her eyes locked onto mine with intense meaning. I thought it might be yours, sir, but it doesn't look like your heart medicine. The air in the room vanished. Amanda's face went white, draining of the flush that had just appeared. Give me that, Amanda snapped. She lunged forward, snatching the vial from Elena's hand with a speed that spoke of pure panic. It's just some skin serum, she stammered, clutching the vial to her chest. I dropped it. It's empty. A clumsy lie. Desperation smells like sweat and cheap excuses. Elena didn't back down. She looked at me. A silent message passed between us. I saw what she did. I know. Thank you, Elena, I said. You can go. Elena nodded. She didn't leave the house. I knew she wouldn't. She backed out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. You have very nosy staff, Amanda muttered, shoving the vial deep into the pocket of her apron. She was breathing hard now, short, shallow gasps. Her heart was beginning to skip beats, trying to regulate a signal that was being jammed. "She is loyal," I said, staring at Daniel. "Loyalty is rare these days. Isn't it, Daniel?" Daniel stared at the floor. He was shaking violently now, the tremors radiating through the sofa. I need some water," Daniel said, his voice thick. He stood up, his legs unsteady. "Sit down," Amanda ordered. She tried to shout, but her voice cracked. She grabbed her chest, wincing. "Daniel, sit down. Don't leave me." Daniel sat. He was terrified of her. Even as she was crumbling, her hold on him was absolute. "Why is my heart beating so fast?" Amanda whispered, pressing her hand over her sternum. "Perhaps it's the excitement," I said. "Or the coffee." Suddenly the front doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a sharp, aggressive, sustained ring. Someone was leaning on the button. "Who is that?" Daniel jumped up again, panic flaring in his eyes. "We aren't expecting anyone. The roads are closed." "I am," I said calmly. "Who?" Amanda asked. Her words were slurring heavily now, her tongue feeling too big for her mouth. "My lawyer." The library doors swung open, but the man who stepped in wasn't my lawyer. He wasn't the polished, articulate corporate counsel I had employed for decades. He was a man wearing a cheap suit that fit poorly across the shoulders. He carried a battered leather briefcase and wore shoes that had seen too much salt and not enough polish. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. He didn't look sorry. He looked hungry. "I'm Leonard Vance, attorney at law. New threat identified." "I didn't call for a lawyer," I said, tightening my grip on my cane. "I did," Amanda said. She stood up, swaying dangerously. She grabbed the back of her chair for support. "Just for routine updates," she managed to say. "Mr. Vance is efficient." Vance walked to the table, ignoring me completely. He slapped a folder down on the mahogany surface. It landed with a heavy, final sound. "Just a few signatures, Mr. Sterling," Vance said, uncapping a cheap plastic pen. "Power of attorney updates. Standard for a man of your declining health." He held the pen out to me. I looked at his hand. His fingernails were dirty. There was a tremor in his fingers, too. Not from age, but from whatever substance he was using to keep himself awake. "Sign here," Vance said, tapping the paper. "And here." I looked at the document. It wasn't an update. It was an abdication. A total transfer of assets. Real estate. Stocks. The trust. Everything to Daniel and Amanda. Effective immediately. "I'm not signing this," I said, my voice low. "Oh, I think you should," Vance said. His tone changed. The facade of professionalism dropped. He leaned in, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and mints. "Your health is failing, William. We all see it. You're confused. You're frail." He looked at Amanda, who was now clutching the table, her face a sheen of sweat. "Right, Mrs. Sterling?" Vance asked. Amanda tried to nod, but her head lolled to the side. Her eyes were unfocused, darting around the room, chasing phantoms. "Yes," she mumbled. "Sign it, old man. Just sign it," she gasped, a sharp intake of air. "My chest," she whined. "It feels like a vice." I looked at Vance. "I think your client is unwell, Mr. Vance," I said. Vance frowned. He looked at Amanda. She was sweating profusely now, beads of perspiration rolling down her neck. Her skin had taken on a yellowish, waxy tint. "Amanda?" Daniel asked, his voice rising in panic. "Honey, what's wrong?" "Everything is yellow," she whispered, terrified. "Daniel, why is everything yellow?" The digitalis had breached the walls. The collapse had begun. "Yellow," I repeated, the word hanging in the air like smoke. A fascinating I leaned forward, the leather of my chair groaning beneath me. To Vance, it was the sound of an old man shifting his weight. To me, it was the sound of a judge settling onto the bench. "Digitalis toxicity," I said, my voice devoid of empathy. "It affects the cones in the retina. It alters the perception of color. A classic sign of overdose. Specifically, an overdose of digoxin." The room went dead silent. The wind outside bit. The wind outside battered the glass, a chaotic drumbeat against the stillness inside. Vance looked at me, his brow furrowing. He was a bottom feeder, man, used to intimidation and quick settlements, not medical lectures from geriatrics. What are you talking about? Vance demanded. She's just stressed. It's the heat. It's not the heat, Mr. Vance, I said calmly. It's the chemistry. I looked at Amanda. She was slumped in her chair now, her breathing ragged. Her hands clawed at the fabric of her sweater, pulling at the collar as if it were strangling her. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically, trying to find a focal point in a world that was rapidly turning into a Van Gogh painting. Maybe you should lie down, Amanda, I suggested, my tone conversational. You look terrible. The heart can only take so much strain before the structural integrity fails. You, of all people, should know about calculating risk. Shut up, she hissed. It was a guttural sound, wet and weak. She tried to focus her gaze on me, fighting through the yellow haze. You, why aren't you? She stopped. The question died in her throat, choked off by a sudden terrifying realization. Why aren't I what, Amanda? I asked softly. Sick, confused, dead. I let the silence stretch. I let the weight of the moment crush down on her. I wanted her to do the math. I wanted her to solve the equation. She stared at me. Then her eyes drifted down to the table, to the mugs. The red mug with the Santa face, empty, sitting on her coaster. The green mug with the reindeer, half full, sitting next to me. The realization hit her like a freight train. I saw it happen. I saw the cognitive gears grind to a halt, then reverse, then shatter. You switched them, she whispered. The horror in her voice was absolute. What? Daniel asked, his voice trembling. He looked between us, a child lost in a storm. Switched what? He switched them, she screamed. She lurched to her feet, knocking her chair back. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, a harsh wooden clap. She swayed, her equilibrium gone, and collapsed back against the table, sending the red mug crashing to the floor. It shattered, shards of ceramic skittering across the Persian rug like shrapnel. He poisoned me, she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. He put the drug in my cup. I did no such thing, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth has its own volume. I merely drank from the cup I chose, I continued, smoothing the blanket on my lap. You prepared 2 beverages. You placed one in front of me. You turned your back to close the drapes. A tactical error, Amanda. Never take your eyes off the enemy. I simply reallocated the resources. Then stepped back, his back hitting the bookshelf. He looked from the shattered mug to Amanda, who was now clutching her chest, gasping for air. He realized the plan, whatever simple signature scam he thought he was running, was dissolving into a felony murder charge. I should go, Vance stammered. He reached for his briefcase with a sweaty hand. This is domestic. I can't be here for this. Sit down, I commanded. My voice boomed. It wasn't the raspy whisper of the last hour. It was the voice that had commanded fleets of cargo ships across the Pacific. It was the voice that had fired executives and shut down factories. Vance froze. He looked at me, and for the first time, he, the man I used to be. The lion. If you leave this room, Mr. Vance, you become an accessory to attempted murder, I said. Sit down. Vance sank onto the sofa next to Daniel, clutching his briefcase to his chest like a shield. Daniel, Amanda shrieked. She was sliding down the side of the table, her legs unable to support her weight. Call 911. He's killing me. My heart. It's skipping. Daniel looked at me. His face was a mask of confusion, terror, and a slow, dawning comprehension that was painful to watch. Dad, Daniel stammered. What is she saying? She's saying she tried to murder me, son, I said, looking him dead in the eye. She put a lethal dose of my Dexin, perhaps combined with crushed pills, into my coffee. She intended for me to have a cardiac event. A natural death for an old man. But she drank it instead. No. Daniel backed away, pressing himself into the sofa cushions. No, she wouldn't, she said. We just needed the signature. She lied to you, Daniel, I said gently. Just like she lied about the debts. Just like she lied about the gambling. Murder was the only way to get the trust released immediately. You know the terms. I have to be incapacitated. Or deceased. Check her pocket, I commanded, pointing with my cane. The vial Elena saw. It is still there. Daniel looked at his wife. She was on the floor now, convulsing slightly. Her breathing was a series of ragged gasps. "Help me, you idiot," she yelled at him, her voice raw. "Get the antidote."
It's in my bag. The blue pills. The antidote.
My eyes narrowed, so she had planned for contingencies. She had prepared a kill switch in case of accidental ingestion, or perhaps to save herself if she lost her nerve. Smart, evil, calculative, but smart. Daniel sat frozen. He looked at the woman who had promised to love him, the woman who had isolated him from his friends, his family, his own spine. And now, she was admitting to it. She wasn't denying the poison. She was demanding the cure. "Daniel," she screamed, "I'm dying." Daniel scrambled off the sofa. He ran to her purse, which was lying on the floor near the door. He dumped it out. Lipstick, keys, a leather wallet, a pack of gum, and a small, orange prescription bottle. He grabbed it. He looked at the label. Beta blockers, I noted aloud. Propranolol, perhaps. To counteract the arrhythmia, she knew exactly what she was doing. She researched the counteragent. Daniel froze. He held the pills in his hand. He looked at the label, then he looked at me. "You really did it," Daniel whispered. The realization broke him. I saw his posture collapse. "You tried to kill him. On Christmas." "Feed the money!" she sobbed, clutching her chest. "Do it! Give me the pills!" "My heart is stopping!" Vance lunged forward from the sofa. "Give her the damn pills, kid! If she dies, we're all screwed!" I slammed my hickory cane onto the low table. Crack! The sound was like a gunshot in the confined space. The heavy wood splintered the edge of the table. "Touch him," I said to Vance, my voice low and lethal, "and you will never practice law again. Assuming you ever did, stay seated." Vance stopped, his hands raised in surrender. Daniel stood up. He stepped back from Amanda. He held the bottle of pills tight in his fist. "No," Daniel said. "What?" she gasped, her face contorted in pain and shock. "I won't help you," Daniel said. His voice was shaking, tears streaming down his face, but his stance was firm. For the first time in his life, the foundation held. "You turned me into a monster. You made me wish my own father was dead. I won't let you do this anymore. I'm dying," she screamed, her voice turning into a gurgle. "I'm calling the police," Daniel said. He pulled out his phone with his free hand. "Don't bother," I said, leaning back into the shadows of my chair. "They are already here." Just then my phone buzzed in my lap, a sharp, insistent vibration. I looked at the screen. It was a security alert from the front gate camera system. "Alert. Perimeter breach. Vehicle impact." A second later, a dull, heavy thud echoed through the house. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of metal hitting metal. "It seems we have more guests," I said. Amanda stopped screaming for a second. The fear of death was replaced by a different kind of terror. Her eyes, yellow and terrified, darted to the window. "Marcus," she whispered. "Who is Marcus?" I asked. He's the lender," she choked out, curling into a ball on the rug. He said, if I didn't get the signature by noon, he would come get it himself." I checked the clock on the mantelpiece. It was 12:05 p.m. Threat level escalated. I muttered to myself. "External breach. Daniel, lock the library door," I ordered. "Dad, who are these people?" Daniel asked, panic rising in his voice again. "What is happening?" "The consequences of your wife's greed," I said. "She didn't just borrow money, Daniel. She borrowed from sharks. And when you borrow blood money, eventually, the sharks come to collect." I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly steady. The adrenaline was a powerful drug, far better than the coffee. I grabbed my cane. It was heavy, made of solid hickory, capped with a heavy brass head. It wasn't just for walking. It was a bludgeon. "Stay down," I told Amanda. "You're safer on the floor." We heard it then, heavy boots stomping on the front porch. The sound of aggressive movement. The front door handle jiggled violently. Then a heavy kick. Bam! The wood splintered. The sound echoed through the silent house like a thunderclap. The front door flew open. The wind howled into the hallway. carrying snow and men with it. "Sterling," a voice roared from the foyer. It was deep, gravelly, and promised violence. "We know you're in there." I looked at Vance. He was cowering in the corner, trying to make himself invisible. "Open the library doors, Daniel," I said calmly. "Dad, are you crazy?" Daniel hissed. "They'll kill us. They will break them down anyway," I said. "I prefer to meet my guests face to face." "Open them." Daniel hesitated, then unlocked the heavy oak doors. He swung them open and stepped back, shielding himself behind a high-backed chair. I stood in the center of the room. An old man, a cane, a dying woman on the floor, and 3 men walking down my hallway. The leader was huge. He wore a long black wool coat that was wet with snow. He had a scar running down his cheek that distorted his lip into a permanent sneer. This was Marcus, the bull. Frank's file had been very specific about him. He enjoyed pain. 2 thugs stood behind him, looking like carbon copies of bad decisions. "Merry Christmas," Marcus grunted, stepping into the library. He brought the cold with him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked around the room. He saw the shattered mug. He saw Amanda gasping on the rug. He saw Vance shaking in the corner. "Looks like things didn't go to plan, Mandy," Marcus said, looking down at her with disgust. "You told me it would be done by noon." He reached into his coat. He pulled out a gun, a semi-automatic, matte black. "Ugly," Daniel screamed. It was a raw, primal sound. He threw himself in front of me, his arms spread wide. "Don't touch him," Daniel yelled. For the first time in years, my son looked like a man. He was terrified, shaking, but he was standing between the wolf and the sheep. Or so he thought. "Get out of the way, kid," Marcus said, racking the slide of the gun. Click-clack. "I'm here for the old man's signature, or his fingers. I'm not picky. Once I have the assets, you can all rot." "You are trespassing," I said. My voice did not I stepped out from behind Daniel, pushing him gently aside with my cane. "Dad, no!" Daniel cried. "And you are out of time," Marcus replied, raising the gun. The barrel was pointed directly at my chest. I looked at the gun. Then I looked at the window behind Marcus. I had calculated the arrival time of the police, based on Frank's text. I had calculated the time it would take to break the gate. "Now!" I shouted. "Now!" I shouted. The command hadn't even finished echoing off the bookshelves when the world exploded. The floor-to-ceiling library windows, heavy panes of leaded glass that had withstood blizzards for a century, shattered inward. It wasn't a simple break. It was a detonation. A concussive boom rocked the room, followed by the terrifying high-pitched scream of 1,000 shards of glass taking flight. The storm outside, which had been pressing against the glass for days, finally breached the perimeter. A wave of freezing air carrying snow and ice blasted into the warm library, swirling the smoke from the fireplace and sending papers from the desk spiraling into the air like frightened birds. "Police! Drop it!" The roar didn't come from one throat, but from 6. Frank Miller and his tactical team poured through the broken window frames, their boots crunching on the glass, their movements fluid and practiced. They were shadows moving in the snow, dark shapes against the blinding white light of the tactical floodlights they had set up in the garden. Dozens of red laser dots danced across the room, frenzied fireflies. Seeking a target, they converged on Marcus's chest, on his forehead, on the hand holding the gun. Marcus froze. For a split second, the bull considered charging. I saw the muscles in his neck bunch, the primal instinct to fight surging against the logic of survival. He looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at the 5 assault rifles pointed at his center of mass. "Drop it or die," Frank roared, stepping through the debris, his service weapon drawn and steady. "Do it now." The silence that followed was louder than the explosion. It was the silence of a held breath. The wind whistled through the jagged teeth of the broken window. Amanda moaned from the floor, a low, pathetic sound of delirium. Marcus looked at me. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown. He saw the old man with the cane, standing amidst the wreckage, unmoved. He realized too late that he wasn't the predator in this room. He was the pest. His fingers opened. The gun fell. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy metallic clatter that signaled the end of the siege. "Get on the ground. Face down. Hands behind your back." The officers swarmed. It was a chaotic ballet of violence. Marcus was tackled, his face pressed into the shards of glass and snow that littered the rug. The two thugs behind him dropped to their knees, hands raised, begging not to be shot. Handcuffs clicked, a sharp, ratcheting sound that brought a strange sense of order to the chaos. "Clear," one officer shouted. "Clear," another echoed from the hallway. The threat was neutralized in 14 seconds. I stood perfectly still, my hand gripping the head of my cane. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic staccato rhythm that reminded me I was 72, not 40. But I didn't let my knees buckle. Not yet. I brushed a shard of glass off my wool blanket. It tinkled as it hit the floor. "Good timing, Frank," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, muffled by the ringing in them. Frank Miller holstered his weapon. He walked over to me, crunching glass under his heavy boots. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his grin was the same one he'd had when he was my head of security. "I was waiting for the signal," Frank said, shouting slightly to be heard over the wind. "Though I didn't think you'd make us come through the window, William. That mahogany door would have been easier to kick in." "I like a dramatic entrance," I said. "And the door is an antique. The windows are insured." Frank laughed, a short bark of relief. He put a hand on my shoulder, giving it a squeeze. It was a check. "Are you okay?" I nodded. I am still standing. Behind us the chaos shifted gears. The tactical team stepped back, and the paramedics rushed in. They carried heavy orange bags and a portable stretcher. They didn't go to Marcus. They went straight to Amanda. She ingested digoxin. I told the lead paramedic, a young woman with efficient hands. Unknown quantity, followed by propranolol. She is experiencing xanthopsia and severe arrhythmia. The paramedic looked at me, surprised by the diagnosis, then nodded. She knelt beside Amanda. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Amanda was writhing weakly. Her skin was clammy, gray as ash. "Yellow," she mumbled. "The snow is yellow. Heart rate is erratic," the paramedic called out. "BP is bottoming out. Let's get a line in. We need to push digibind. Now." They worked with a frantic precision. Sleeves were cut. Needles were inserted. Monitors began to beep, a rhythmic counterpoint to the howling wind. I watched them save the life of the woman who had tried to end mine. It was a strange sensation, a mixture of pity and revulsion. She had been so beautiful, so polished, so sure of her superiority. Now she was a mess of wires and tubes, defeated by her own weapon. Daniel stood by the fireplace, out of the way. He was staring at her, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man watching his house burn down, knowing he had struck the match. As the paramedics lifted Amanda onto the stretcher, the antidote beginning to stabilize her rhythm, her eyes fluttered open. She looked around the room, at the police, at the broken window, at her husband cowering in the corner. Then her gaze landed on me. The fog in her eyes cleared for a second. The hate that stared back was pure, distilled, and ancient. "You," she rasped. Her voice was a ruined thing. The paramedics began to wheel her toward the shattered window, the quickest exit. As she passed me, she reached out a hand, her fingers hooking into the air like claws. "You old devil," she whispered. I looked down at her. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. "I am a businessman, Amanda," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "I just closed the account." She fell back against the stretcher, sobbing. Not tears of remorse, not tears of guilt, tears of defeat. She hadn't lost because she was wrong in her mind. She had lost because I was luckier. She would never understand. They wheeled her out into the snow, the red and blue lights of the ambulance reflecting off the ice. Marcus and his thugs were dragged out next, cursing and spitting. Marcus glared at me as he passed. "This isn't over, old man," he growled. "It is for you," Frank said, shoving him forward. "You're looking at 20 years, Marcus. Armed robbery, assault, attempted kidnapping. By the time you get out, the only thing you'll be threatening is a bowl of oatmeal." Then they came for Van. The lawyer was still sitting on the sofa, weeping openly. He had wet himself. The dark stain on his cheap trousers was spreading. "I didn't do anything," Vance wailed as an officer pulled him up. "I was just legal counsel. I didn't know about the poison. I didn't know about the gun." "You knew enough to bring a fraudulent power of attorney," I said. And you watched a woman die or try to without lifting a finger. Please, Vance begged, looking at Daniel. Tell them I tried to help. Daniel looked at Vance. He looked at the man who had bullied him, the man who had helped Amanda dismantle his confidence piece by piece. Daniel turned his back. They dragged Vance out, his loafers sliding on the glass. The library fell silent. The wind continued to blow snow through the broken window, dusting the Persian rug with a layer of white. The temperature had plummeted. The fire in the hearth was struggling against the draft. The house felt violated. The sanctuary was brief. The smell of pine and cinnamon was gone, replaced by the metallic tang of adrenaline, the exhaust of the SWAT van, and the cold, clean scent of snow. I leaned heavily on my cane. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. My hand shook uncontrollably now. I sat back down in my wingback chair, pulling the tartan blanket up to my chest. Daniel was still standing by the fireplace. He hadn't moved. He was shivering, but I didn't think it was from the cold. He slowly slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in his hands. Then came the sound. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs. The kind of crying that hurts your throat. The sound of a man mourning the death of his life, as he knew it. I watched him for a long time. I let him cry. He needed to empty the vessel before he could refill it. Finally, I stood up. My knees protested, but I ignored them. I walked over to him, the glass crunching under my slippers. I stood over my son. I'm sorry, he choked out, his voice muffled by his knees. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm weak. I'm so weak. He looked up at me. His face was a ruin of snot and tears. He looked like he was 5 years old again after breaking my favorite vase. You were, I said gently. I didn't sugarcoat it. Truth is the only concrete that sets hard. You were weak, Daniel. You let her twist you. You let her blind you. I let her try to kill you, he whispered. How can you ever trust me again? I stood there. I watched you drink it. You stood there, I agreed. But today, when the gun was drawn, when the wolf was at the door, you didn't hide. I remembered the moment Marcus raised the gun. I remembered Daniel throwing his body in front of mine. It was a clumsy, terrified gesture. But it was a shield. You stood in front of me, I said. That matters. That is a load-bearing action. That's not enough, he wept. It is a start, I said. Trust is like a building, Daniel. Yours collapsed today. The demolition was total. But the foundation, the bedrock, is still there. We will rebuild it, brick by brick. Frank walked back into the room. He was brushing snow off his tactical vest. He held a thick file folder in his hand. But he wasn't alone. A woman stepped in behind him. She was dressed in a heavy trench coat, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore glasses and carried a briefcase. Daniel looked up. His eyes went wide. Sarah? He whispered. It was Sarah, Daniel's ex-fiancée. The woman he had loved before Amanda sank her claws in. The woman he had left because Amanda convinced him she wasn't ambitious enough. Sarah was an auditor now, a forensic accountant for the state. I asked Sarah to come, I told Daniel. Frank reached out to her 3 days ago when we first suspected the fraud. Hello, Daniel, Sarah said softly. She didn't look angry. She looked sad. She looked at the broken window, the snow, and the broken man on the floor. Why are you here? Daniel asked, wiping his face with his sleeve. She walked over to the table, avoiding the glass. She opened her briefcase. Because your father wanted you to see the whole picture, Sarah said. Not just the poison, the math. She laid out a spreadsheet. Even from a distance, I could see the red ink. Amanda wasn't just paying debts, Sarah said, her voice professional but caned. She was skimming from your architecture firm. She was funneling money into offshore accounts in the Caymans. She was building an exit strategy. Daniel pulled himself up. He looked at the papers. He saw the transfers. He saw the dates. She started this 2 years ago, Daniel whispered. She was going to leave you, Daniel. Sarah said. As soon as the trust was signed, as soon as William was gone. She pointed to a travel itinerary stapled to the back. She had a plane ticket booked for January 1st, Sarah said. One ticket, one way, to Rio. Daniel stared at the paper. The final illusion shattered. He hadn't just been an accomplice. He had been a mark, a patsy. She played me, Daniel whispered. The realization wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It was a dull, heavy ache. The whole time, she never loved me. She just loved the potential inheritance. She loved the prey, I said, and you made yourself easy to hunt. Daniel closed the file. He placed his hand on top of it. He took a deep breath. The shivering stopped. She's gone, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. She is gone, I confirmed. And she is never coming back. The wind howled through the broken window, but inside, the air felt cleaner. The rot had been cut out. The surgery was brutal, and the patient was critical, but the infection was gone. Now the healing could begin. 3 months later, the winter did not surrender easily. It clung to the Hudson Valley with icy fingers, weeks of gray slush and freezing rain that refused to yield. But eventually the physics of the seasons took over. The tilt of the earth shifted. The sun angles steepened. The thaw began. The estate looked different in the spring light. The snow that had buried the stone walls was gone, replaced by the wet, dark earth of March. The broken library window had been replaced, the glass reinforced, the frame resealed. The house was whole again, but it bore the invisible scars of the siege. I sat on the front porch, a mug of tea warming my hands. I didn't need the blanket today, though the air still held a bite. In the lower garden, near the old carriage house, Daniel was working. He was digging, not with a machine, but with a shovel. He was stripped to his undershirt, his skin, pale and soft from years of office lighting and compromise, now bronzed and slick with sweat. He was building a retaining wall for a new terrace. He was paying off his debts, not with my money. I had offered, but he had refused. He was paying them with his labor. I need to feel the weight of it, Dad, he had told me a week after the arrest. I need to sweat it out. I watched him lift a heavy limestone block, his muscles straining, his jaw set. He placed it carefully, checking the level, adjusting the fit. He was learning the lesson I had tried to teach him for decades. Structure matters. You cannot build on a lot. He looked happier than I had seen him in 20 years. He was tired. Yes, his hands were blistered and calloused. But he was solid. The softness that Amanda had exploited was hardening into something durable. A car crunched up the gravel driveway. It wasn't a sleek luxury sedan or a menacing SUV. It was a dusty police cruiser. Frank Miller stepped out. He wasn't in uniform. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, sunglasses perched on his head. He walked up the porch steps, carrying a manila envelope. "Morning, William," Frank said, leaning against the railing. "Wall's looking good." "He's rebuilding the grate," I said, nodding toward Daniel. "Fixing the drainage. It was eroding the foundation." "Metaphor alert," Frank grinned. "I am an old man, Frank. Metaphors are all I have left." Frank's smile faded slightly. He tapped the envelope against his hand. "I have something for you. A request." I looked at the envelope. I knew what it was before he handed it to me. "Amanda," I said. "She's at Bedford Hills," Frank said. "Maximum security wing. The trial is set for June, but she's been vocal. She's been vocal. She filed a formal request to see you." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, though it contained only a single sheet of paper. "She claims she has information," Frank continued, his voice low, "about hidden assets. She says she'll only talk to you. Not her lawyer, not the DA, just you." I looked down at the garden. Daniel had stopped digging. He was leaning on his shovel, wiping his forehead. He saw Frank. He waved. It was a wave of a free man. "She doesn't have information," I said quietly. She was thorough, but she wasn't that clever. "Sarah found every dime she stole." "So, you're going to decline?" Frank asked. "I can tell them to shove it. You don't need the stress, William. Your heart—" "My heart is fine, Frank. It was the coffee that was the problem." I stood up. I looked at the envelope again. "She wants to see if the poison still works," I said. "She wants to see if she can still manipulate the data, if she can still find a crack in the hull. And can she—" I looked at my son in the garden. He was laughing now, talking to Sarah, who had just arrived with a tray of lemonade. "No," I said, "but I need to close the file. I don't leave manifests unchecked." The prison was a fortress of concrete and razor wire, a place designed to strip the humanity from its inhabitants. It smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. I sat in the visitation booth. The glass partition was thick, scarred by scratches from diamond rings and desperate fingernails. On my side, the air was stale. On her side, it looked cold. The door buzzed. Amanda walked in. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame. The transformation was shocking, even though I had anticipated it. The armor was gone. The designer clothes, the heavy makeup, the perfectly coiffed hair, all stripped away. Her hair was dull, the dark roots showing an inch of growth against the expensive blonde dye. Her skin was sallow, but it was her eyes that held my attention. They weren't defeated. They were hard. Flinty, they burned with a cold, concentrated hate. She sat down. She picked up the black phone receiver. I picked up mine. "You look well, William," she said. Her voice was tinny through the speaker, but the sarcasm was high definition. "I am well," I said calmly. "The daffodils are coming up. The estate is quite beautiful this time of year." She flinched, the reminder of the world she had lost. "And Daniel?" she asked. "How is the little prince? Is he lost, without me telling him which tie to wear?" "Daniel is thriving," I said. "He is filing for divorce. He is working with his hands. He is sleeping at night. He has remembered how to be a man." Her eye twitched, a small involuntary spasm. "He can't survive without me," she hissed. "He's a child. I was the one who gave him a spine. I was the one who pushed him. You didn't push him, Amanda. You drove him, like a mule, and when he stumbled, you tried to sell him to the glue factory." She leaned forward. Her breath fogged the glass. "I did what I had to do," she said. "You were sitting on a mountain of gold, hoarding it like a dragon. We were drowning. You were drowning in your own greed," I corrected. "There was always a lifeline. You just didn't want to ask for it. You wanted to steal the boat." She stared at me. She realized that her justifications were bouncing off me like pebbles off a tank. She shifted tactics. Her face changed. The hardness melted away, replaced by a sudden trembling vulnerability. It was a performance, a masterclass. "I have a secret," she whispered. "The information I told the warden about. I know about the Cayman accounts, Amanda. Sarah found them. Not money," she said. She smiled. It was a cruel, twisted expression that didn't match the tears forming in her eyes. "Something personal. Something you don't know." "Oh?" I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Enlighten me." She pressed her hand against the glass, palm flat. "I was pregnant," she whispered. The words hung in the air between us, suspended in the static of the phone line. "When I drank that coffee," she continued, her voice gaining strength, feeding off the shock she hoped to inflict. "When you switched the mugs, when you poisoned me, my heart skipped a beat. A physical reaction, the biological imperative of a grandfather. You didn't just almost kill me, William," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical sob. "You killed your grandchild. I lost the baby in the hospital. The digoxin, the stress." She looked at me, searching for the wound. She wanted to see the grief. She wanted to see the guilt crush me. She wanted to leave me with a ghost that would haunt me for the few years I had left. Target locked, firing solution calculated. For a second, the world stopped. The air left the room. It was the ultimate knife in the rib, the twist I hadn't seen coming. I stared at her. I looked for the truth. I saw the slight flare of her nostrils. I saw the way her hand clenched the phone too tight, the knuckles white. I saw the shimmer of anticipation in her eyes. She wasn't mourning a loss. She was celebrating a hit. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. "No," I said softly. Her smile faltered. "What?" "I anticipated this," I said. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased, official, stamped with the seal of the county hospital. "I knew you would try to find a leverage point," I said, unfolding the paper. "So, I had Frank pull your full medical records from the admission on Christmas Day. The toxicology screen, the blood work, the ultrasound. I pressed the paper against the glass, facing her. You weren't pregnant, Amanda? You were never pregnant. Your HCG levels were 0. Her face went slack. The mask crumbled. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by panic. They made a mistake, she stammered. It was early. In fact, I continued, my voice relentless. According to your medical history, which I now have access to as part of the criminal discovery process, you had a procedure done 5 years ago. A bilateral sampingectomy. I leaned forward, bringing my face inches from the glass. You had your tubes tied, Amanda. You made sure you could never have children. You lied to Daniel about trying for a family for 5 years. The silence was absolute. The malice turned to ash in her mouth. She had played her ace, and I had trumped it with simple, cold, hard data. She slammed the phone against the counter. Crack. You investigate everything, she screamed. The sound was muffled by the glass, but the rage was palpable. You soulless old man. You track everything. I told you, I said, standing up and smoothing my jacket. I ran a global logistics empire. Amanda, I don't move cargo without checking the manifest. And I certainly don't let a stowaway sink the ship. She was screaming now, silent words of profanity and hate, mouthing behind the glass. She pounded on the barrier with her fists. I hung up the phone. I didn't look back. I turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. Behind me, the guards were moving in to restrain her. I heard the scuffle, the shouts, but I was already gone. I walked out of the prison, through the checkpoints, through the metal detectors, and into the bright, blinding sunshine of spring. The air smelled of mud and new grass. It smelled of truth. The drive back from the prison was a journey through 2 different worlds. I left behind the razor wire, the gray concrete, and the suffocating air of incarceration, and drove back into the Hudson Valley, where the world was waking up. The trees were budding, a haze of pale green against the slate sky. The river was moving fast, swollen with meltwater, scrubbing the banks clean. I parked the car in front of the garage. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. It was done. The file was not just closed, it was shredded. The ghost of Amanda, the threat she represented, the doubt she had sown, had been exorcised by the cold light of medical facts. I felt lighter, but I also felt the sudden, crushing weight of age. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the winter was gone, leaving behind the simple, aching reality of being 72. I walked into the house through the mudroom. My boots felt heavy. Daniel was in the kitchen. The room was filled with the rich, complex aroma of roasting beans. He was standing at the granite island, measuring grounds into a French press with the precision of a chemist. He wasn't wearing his architect's suit, nor the terrified expression of a man walking on eggshells. He wore a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms dusted with garden soil. He heard the door close. He stopped pressing the plunger. "How was it?" he asked. He didn't turn around immediately. I could see the tension in his shoulders. He was afraid of what she might have said. He was afraid she still had claws. I walked to the counter and leaned my cane against it. "It was a closing," I said simply. "The account is liquidated. The file is archived." Daniel turned then. He searched my face, looking for the scars of the encounter. "Did she—" He hesitated. "Did she try to hurt you?" "She tried," I said. "She attempted to deploy a final emotional weapon, a lie about a pregnancy." Daniel flinched, as if I had slapped him. His face went pale. "Oh, God." "Dad, It was a lie, Daniel," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I had the medical records. She was never pregnant." "She never could be. She had the procedure done years ago without telling you." Daniel stared at me. The horror morphed into a profound, quiet sadness. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the last proof that his marriage had been a fraud from the start. He wasn't mourning the child that never existed. He was mourning the years he had spent believing in a mirage. "She really hated me," Daniel whispered. "No," I said. "She didn't hate you. You were a resource. She was strip mining you, and when the mine ran dry, she tried to demolish the owner." Daniel nodded slowly. He took a deep breath, exhaling the last of her influence. He turned back to the coffee. He pushed the plunger down, slow, steady, resisting the pressure, Coffee? He asked. Please. He poured 2 earthenware mugs. He didn't use the fine china. He used the sturdy, everyday mugs we used for breakfast. He slid one across the granite to me. Black, Daniel said. No sugar, no cream. He met my eyes. No secret ingredients. I picked up the mug. The heat radiated into my cold palms. I brought it to my nose. It smelled of earth and smoke and honesty. I took a sip. It was bitter, strong, and hot. It was perfect. Excellent, I said. I walked to the bay window that overlooked the west lawn. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. The snow was almost gone, just a few stubborn patches in the shadows of the pines, retreating like a beaten army. I had won. I had saved my life. I had saved my estate. I had saved my son. But as I watched the sunset, a thought settled over me, heavy as a blanket. Vigilance is a lonely companion. It had kept me safe. It had allowed me to spot the cracks, to predict the collapse, to switch the mugs, but it had also kept me cold. I had spent years building walls to keep the enemy out that I had almost forgotten to put doors in them to let my family in. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant. Then Daniel stood beside me. He didn't speak. He just stood there, holding his mug, watching the day die. Dad? He asked softly, after a long silence. Yes, son. Thank you. I looked at him. For what? For not giving up on me, he said. His voice caught in his throat. You had every right to cut me out, to sign the papers and let me drown. I was so blind. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. I felt the muscle there, solid and real. You were blind because you were looking for love, I said. That is not a sin, Daniel. It is a structural vulnerability, yes, but it is also what makes the building worth inhabiting. He looked at me, tears swimming in his eyes. Never, I said. I would never give up on you. You are the only thing I ever built that truly matters. We stood there until the coffee was cold. The house wasn't silent anymore. The refrigerator hummed. The floorboards settled. It wasn't a vault. It was a home. Frank stopped by 2 hours later. The sky was black now, studded with the hard, bright stars of early spring. Frank let himself in the back door, carrying a flat, square cardboard box that smelled of grease and oregano. Thought you boys might be hungry, Frank said, dropping the pizza box onto the kitchen table. And I figured Elena isn't here to slap my hand. Pepperoni? I asked, eyeing the box. My cardiologist would have a stroke. Your cardiologist isn't here, Frank grinned, grabbing a paper plate. And you survived an assassination attempt and a prison visit in the same quarter. You deserve a slice of clogged arteries. We sat around the kitchen table. Me, Daniel, Frank, 3 men, no secrets, no lawyers, no poison. I heard about Vance, Frank said, chewing a crust. He's singing like a canary. He's terrified of general population. He gave the DA names of every crooked lender, every forged deed, every laundered account he's touched in 20 years. Good, I said, taking a bite. Clean the streets. Structural integrity requires a solid foundation. And Marcus? Daniel asked. He still looked nervous when the name was mentioned. Marcus is done, Frank said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. The bull is in a pen you can't break out of. Federal charges. RICO Act. By the time he sees a parole board, we'll all be done. Daniel let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since Christmas. It's really over, Daniel whispered. The danger is over, I said, looking at the 2 men who had stood by me when the glass shattered. The work is just beginning. Daniel looked at me, confused. The warehouse renovation. Yes, I had. I have been reviewing your sketches. The ones you hid in your old room. Daniel blushed. Those? They're just ideas. Sustainable logistics centers. They are brilliant, I said. I was thinking solar panels on the roof. Geothermal heating for the distribution centers. We need to modernize. Daniel smiled. A real, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Solar is expensive up front, Dad. The ROI takes 10 years. It pays off in the long run, I said, leaning back in my chair. I may not be here to see the break-even point, but you will. I saw the realization hit him. I wasn't just talking about energy. I was talking about legacy. I was talking about trust. We can do it, Daniel said. We can make it work. Elena bustled in then, carrying a basket of laundry. She stopped dead when she saw the pizza box. Mr. Sterling, she scolded, her eyes flashing. Your diet, the salt. Exceptions, Elena, I said, raising a slice and a toast. Today is an exception. Today we are celebrating. She looked at the pizza, then at Frank, then at Daniel, laughing at something Frank said. Her expression softened. She walked over and patted Daniel on the shoulder. It's good to have you home, Daniel, she said softly. It's good to be home, he said, and for the first time in years, he meant it. Later that night, long after Frank had left and Daniel had gone up to the guest room, soon to be his room again, I walked through the house. I checked the front door. The new lock was solid, the wood reinforced with steel. I checked the library windows. The new glass was double-paned, impact-resistant. I checked the alarm panel, a steady green light, but I didn't check them because I was afraid. I checked them because I am a caretaker. I walked into the library. The rug had been replaced. The smell of digoxin and desperation was gone, replaced by the scent of old paper and lemon polish. I sat in my wing-back leather chair. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting a warm, pulsating light on the shelves. I picked up my book, but I didn't read. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. For 3 days in December, the silence had been a threat. It had been the sound of a predator holding its breath. Now the silence was different. It was the silence of peace. It was the sound of a house that was safe, holding people who were loved. I am William Sterling. I am 72 years old. I walk with a cane. My hand shakes. I know that winter always comes again. I know that the world is full of fractures, and that entropy is always waiting to pull the structure down. I know that there will always be wolves at the door, whispering promises in the dark. But next time I won't be facing it alone. I looked up at the ceiling, thinking of my son sleeping upstairs, safe and sound. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the quiet air of my home. Life goes on, and so do we. If you enjoyed this journey into the Sterling estate, if you felt the cold of the snow and the heat of the betrayal, then I invite you to join our Hour Kit. Hit the like button to help us build the foundation for more stories like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. Because in this world, vigilance is everything, and you never know when the next chapter will drop. Thank you for reading, and until next time, watch your coffee.